the healing aspects for the goddess woman is about the perfectionism inside of herself. She has a major, major, major inner critic and inner coach that happens inside of her that is really, really perfectionistic. She requires perfectionism from the men that she's dating. She almost takes the list of characteristics on the dates with her and see if they check off all the boxes. And you are going to get to a point, if you haven't yet, if you're a goddess woman, you will get to the point where a man will check off all of the boxes, but he still will not be able to see you, hear you, understand you, and love you the way that you need to be loved. And that is going to be very confronting. And so the work for her is the...
Thank you so much, Lilli, for joining me on today's episode. I'm super excited to chat with you today.
Same. I'm super excited to have this conversation. I love talking about love, and it's crazy, but I do love talking about dating too, which is great because I love your podcast.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome. I'm really excited to chat with you. I know we're in a similar field. I know you also have a podcast, the Lilli Bewley podcast, and yeah, your own coaching practice. And so you are a trauma-informed relationship coach expert. And one of the things that I find so unique about you is this aspects of the archetypes that you bring into that type of work. And yeah, I'm super curious about that. And I'm just wondering maybe if you can give us an idea about, for someone who's never heard of archetypes, what they are and how it applies to this work, how it applies to love, and how you can, I guess, make archetypes work for you in love and dating. I know that's a big question, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, Yvonne, thank you so much for having me here. The feminine dating archetypes was this thing that was given to me really honestly by God, by the universe, a download on what I had experienced through my dating and my relationships, which, a brief kind of synopsis is I didn't have a great example of a healthy spiritual relationship growing up. I grew up in a household where there was a lot of overt and covert abuse and trauma happening. And so I saw myself in this pattern of relationships where I was always kind of crumbling. I was making myself small. I didn't have any needs and wants and desires. I saw this pattern of just being really unhappy, in relationships, while everything on the outside of me seemed to be great with, money, cars, job, everything that society and friends and families would celebrate me on. But on the inside, I was really unhappy because my relationships, and, I was in a really long kind of on and off toxic relationship. That relationship really kind of brought me to my knees because on the outside, I was doing everything that society and everyone told me that I should do to be happy, but I was so unhappy and it didn't make any sense. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel understood. I didn't feel loved in relationship. And it was this pattern for me that I kept seeing again and again and again. I was always the one. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Yvonne, but I was always the one carrying the weight of the relationship. I was always the one learning and growing. I stayed way too long in relationships that didn't serve me. I, in my past kind of long-term relationship, I was the one, setting the date nights, for example, on Friday nights that never ended up coming through, that he said he would do them, but he never did. I was the one learning the love languages of myself and my partner. And really what I wanted was for that to connect us and, for me to feel connected and loved. And the reason I kind of got here in dating specifically is no one really talks about how important it is to choose the right person. Like everyone says, love is all you need. Everyone says, follow your heart, follow your gut. The reason my practice is trauma informed is because number one, if you're trying to just have fun, if you're trying to follow your gut, if you're trying to follow your heart, it's really clouded by the traumas that have happened to you in the past. Because sometimes following your gut is actually following your trauma. And we
Mm.
don't know that until we heal enough inside of ourselves to become an aligned self in our actions and our behaviors and our thoughts and our beliefs and our emotions. So the reason I got into dating was, why not from the beginning choose from your truth instead of your trauma to pick the right person to walk down that dating and relationship journey with you? And it's something that so many people don't talk about. And we will choose from an unhealed place, a wounded place, or a wounded part inside of ourselves if we haven't healed enough.
Mm.
So if anyone's seeing patterns in dating that they don't like, whether that be on the outside or the inside of themselves, there's something happening inside of you that is out of alignment, out of energetic alignment, out of behavioral alignment. So circling back to the question of the archetypes, is this journey, hindsight's 2020, right? So this journey that I went through inside of myself, I take an inside out approach to dating instead of an outside in, which is, I'm sure you see it as well. Everyone takes dating from the outside in, including our friends and our family. Like, oh, just go make this little change on your dating profile and everything's going to be okay.
Mm.
Right. So the feminine dating archetypes came from a look back of the different kind of phases that I went through to calling in an epic love relationship. And this is inside of myself. This is what no one talks about. What's happening inside of my body, my nervous system, my thoughts, my beliefs, my behaviors. And then I started to take my clients through this process that I went through, and then I was noticing the same things, the same phases were happening with them. And
Mm.
then God one day, along with like attachment theory, with different theories and different modalities, it was just like, boom, here they are. And so the feminine dating archetypes were phases actually for me. You can move from one phase to the next by kind of delayering and healing and unlayering and unraveling the things that are kind of blocking you. But they're archetypes because you can get stuck in them, because they can become a
Mm.
lifelong pattern where then you start to believe that you aren't worthy and you aren't enough, like down deep in your soul, like you don't belong and something's broken. I remember the day in this past relationship, not this one that I'm in right now, which is the best relationship I've ever been in my life, but my past relationship where I had just resigned myself to a failed and doomed relationship because that's all I knew. So
Mm.
part of healing, moving from level to level and phase to phase, the way I see it, is experiencing something inside of ourselves that we have never experienced before. And so that's where the feminine dating archetypes come into play, because it's really healing those subconscious and unconscious things that are happening inside of us so that we can change what's happening inside of us so we can attract what we want on the outside of us.
Hmm. Wow. Super powerful. As you were talking, there were so many moments where I was like, yeah, oh my God, I've been there. Like your story just,
Hmm.
and from your work, from my work, like this is such a common story for women.
Hmm.
What you said at the beginning, like being like you were the one that was invested in, growing the relationship. You were the one that was invested in like trying to make it better. You were the one that was making the effort. And this is where women get caught so often. Like we believe we need to work, we need to do to receive love. Like we can't just be in it. And I think what you said too, growing up, and maybe you can speak to this, like uh, specifically maybe to this, like what did you learn growing up about doing to receive love versus just being?
Everything. It was everything. I what I've recognized is especially if you're looking at the models that we're given, by our parents, for example. My parents modeled this like submissive dominant situation in our household where my dad was like, there was a hierarchy. My dad was on the pedestal. He wasn't really a great example. He still isn't a great example. And my mom was kind of this submissive part. So she, all of the things, she didn't have a voice. She made herself small, like very similar patterns that I went through, myself. Um, And so what I got really good at, to answer your question, what I got really good at in my life is getting validation and love through achievement.
Mm.
And that's almost every woman that I know, unless you have really, really walked down that healing journey. Um, I mean, it's everything.
Mm.
And the disconnect is that we really want, if you're listening to this and you really want an epic love, a spiritual love, a healthy love, is that there is a part of us that really, really just wants to be loved for who we are and not what we do. So it takes major rewiring of our brain and our body to realize that we can actually just be, and that to be enough. And it's so much harder than just scrolling through your Instagram and looking, about tips and tools for, self-regulation or being in your feminine energy. This is a major, major, I think we're on the precipice, I think, of something really, really major happening in the feminist, culture and movement, because the thing is, and I don't know if you're the same way or if anyone's listening, I am so good at that. I am so good at achievement. I am so good at validation. I used to receive validation when I was dating. If I could get any hot guy I wanted. It doesn't matter. But did it really fulfill me? Did it bring me to my highest self and highest purpose? Or did it require me to self-sacrifice and self-abandon to keep
Mm.
that connection, to keep that love? I always say I used to pimp myself out for love and connection,
Whew.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are good at this, and this is the problem. This is the issue that I see. It takes a lot of unraveling and unknowing to remember that we are actually enough as we are, right? And it's very
Hmm.
uncomfortable and it's very confronting, because it really changes a lot about the love that you have sought in the past. Mostly has come, if you're at all like me, from my straight A's, from my sports performances, from my
Mm.
resume, from my job, from my bank account. And the problem is all of that quote unquote doing, as you asked, Yvonne, will not, the same thing that have gotten you, and this is the move actually from the feminine dating archetype, from the goddess woman to the magnetic woman, now that we're talking about this. So the goddess
Mm.
woman is really good at doing, she's been through some stuff, she's done her healing, but there's a gap. But because what she's seeing about what she knows that she deserves in her life, but what's actually showing up for her and how she acts and how she feels on the inside, there's a disconnect. And it's a sometimes feels like a gap the size of the Grand Canyon, because
Mm.
it takes really, really, like I said, unknown, or, unraveling what we thought that we knew, and all of the things that have got us out of survival mode into goddess mode will probably not get you to magnetic woman mode, because there's actually no doing and being loved.
Hmm. Wow. So, because a lot of times I think like goddess is like the ultimate, um, I guess like feminine goddess or whatever that term. It's like, okay, that's the ultimate. But I really like that magnetic. Like magnetic is to receive, to pull into. And yeah, I think women, like we are challenged by just receiving without doing. And you said, for you it was like achievement, like grades and success in business and money and material things like cars. For me, it was, I think as well that in a different
Mhm.
way, for me, it was always being like like always being the space for other people and
Mhm.
specifically my parents.
Mhm.
So it was like I was the space for people to talk to. I was the listener. I would take on everyone else's problems, and then that mirrored in relationships. So I would take on whatever problem my partners would have, alcoholism, mental illness, and I would do all the research and I would try to, help them and all the while never speaking like my own struggles, never sharing my own feelings, never taking care of myself, always applying that to others. So yeah, for me, it was a real like stifling of my voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you talk about moving from goddess to magnetic, like I feel like that's kind of the stage that I find myself in now, is really practicing and getting better at just receiving. And receiving also means receiving someone's ear, receiving someone's empathy by me speaking my feelings, my truth, my wants, my needs, where
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the past I would have just held someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been really like, because when you get to that stage, like it's wobbly ground, like it's
Very.
scary. And, now for me, like a need or even an opinion or a feeling will come up and I'll want to keep it down. Like, no, no, this is not the time. Like, this isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
But then allowing myself to say it. And every time I do, it has a positive result. But I feel like, yeah, when we go through these transitions and when we grow, like you said, it is hard work. It's challenging. It's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable. Yeah, the question is when you're talking about, your ability to help, right? Who are we if we weren't a helper?
Mm-hmm.
Who are we if we aren't a coach? Who are we if we aren't a mother? Who are we if we aren't a a boss babe? I don't know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And the gift of who we are is way outside the realm of what we do. So
Mm-hmm.
much outside of that. I always say, like, I have always been a loving, caring, and kind person. I've had an open heart for as long as I can remember, from birth, probably. And I just didn't learn because of my examples and my trauma who to invite in to my heart. So it was everyone,
Mm.
headspace.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing about the goddess woman is that what you mentioned, Yvonne, is that her work is working on receiving, right? Some of the work that she, thinks that she has to work on is receiving, but receiving has not been safe for her in the past for
Mm-hmm.
almost all of the parts of her. And that's big, because like I said, I've always had an open heart. I didn't know who to choose. So I was receiving from everyone, but
Mm.
not everyone belonged there. And so it's not just about receiving, it's about, again, who to pick. Even like this isn't just about dating. This is like, how do you spend your time? How do you spend your energy?
Mm-hmm.
What's your relationship with money? What's your relationship with your job? What's your relationship with your family? What's your relationship with your friends? I can remember, you talk about always being the helper. I was definitely always the helper. In fact, so much so with my friendship, so much so I really don't even feel like that I had a personality. I was fun and I can make people laugh, but that was really a coping mechanism for coming into that helper mentality, that helper role that I had. And
Mm-hmm.
so people will say, oh, just learn how to receive or just let your light shine. None of this can happen out on the outside of you unless you learn how to how how to receive safely inside of yourself. People say let your light shine. You can't let your light shine if your light doesn't feel safe inside of yourself.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of esoteric, but what it means basically is that there are parts of us. The goddess woman has these parts too where we have unconsciously and subconsciously pushed down, pushed aside, pushed away, or even gaslighted inside of us. And we are recreating the traumas that happening on the outside of us, on the inside of us. So the healing work is really and it helps when you're facilitated like therapy or coaching because it's very hard. The goddess woman, it's very hard because she has done like you've done a lot of work on yourself, right? A ton of work on yourself. And there are parts of her though that are still kind of tuned in to judgment. to perfectionism inside
Mhm.
of you, inside of yourself, and control. Like that's the goddess woman. That's kind of the phase for the goddess woman. So there are parts, or in any feminine dating archetype, really, there are parts of ourselves that we just don't know. We haven't met. We've had to push down and pushed away and pushed aside because of the things that have happened to us, because of the failed relationships that we've had in the past, because of the examples, that we were set. And so really that's the work.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. And for your own journey and like dating and love, when you mentioned that your partner now, it's the best relationship of your life, how early did you recognize that? How did you recognize that? And what was it about this person that I guess made you feel safe?
Mm. Wow, great question. I just got the chills on that one, so that hits. Um, I knew pretty quickly. He's the best man that I've ever known. Men to me and parts of me have been unsafe. I've been through some stuff in my life. Um, all of the things, all the types of abuse. I've been through some things. And almost immediately there was a situation where like I got too drunk or something like that and I had to go to bed and he put me to bed. And at the beginning, I must say at the beginning, I was kind of outside of myself because
Mm,
I made the same mistakes that even as a dating coach, I made the same mistakes really that I was making. But for some reason, like this was a whole God-given gift he was. Um, he his integrity from the very beginning was what the examples that I had been craving for from a man.
mm,
And I think that I was so tuned in to myself and my nervous system because it is very hard for us to move from, and I've done, again, done a lot of work. At
mm,
that time, I had the characteristics written out in my dream partner that I wanted. I
mhm,
had written a letter to my soulmate. I had the love altar. And yet I was still at that, like at the time that I met him a couple, maybe months before, I was still like, things weren't adding up. There was a disconnect between what I was knowing that I wanted or I needed and then what I was seeing in my dating life. So I was at definitely the goddess woman phase when I met him. But part of his work, the healing that he helped me with, was to move from the goddess woman to the magnetic woman. But it was only because I had some space inside of myself. And like I said, at the beginning, our relationship, it was not perfect at all.
mm,
Like I even went back to some old patterns. He did as well. And in the beginning, we kind of, there were some boundaries that I slipped up on, but then there were ones that I stuck to.
mhm,
And I'll give you an example
mhm,
from the very beginning. So, I have my coaching business, I have my practice. I like to stay in alignment with who I am, and I would tell him, we go out on a date and we're hanging out. I'd ask him for his help because I knew my self-sabotaging patterns. I knew that I would just want to stay up with him all night. I just want to be in his presence. He's very, very handsome. And I knew kind of the parts that would come up inside of me with him around. And I knew that my quote unquote self-sabotaging patterns could help, you know, make me stay up late and, not have a great day the next day, or help me drink a lot too much so I wouldn't have a great day the next day, to be in alignment with my purpose and who I was, right? So I asked him, I said, "Hey, would you, can you help me get to bed by 9 p.m.? Can you help me do this? Because I really have a lot of stuff going on." And instead of the past relationships would have not heard me, not listened, help me kind of self-sabotage and walk down that road. Let's just party, whatever. I was good at partying, girl. Instead, this changed a lot of things for me at the very beginning. Instead, he was like, "Yeah, I got you, girl. No problem. Like I'll help you get in bed by 9 p.m." And girl, he put me to bed.
mm.
He said, let's go to bed. You told me you want to go to bed by 9. Let's go to bed, right? And so that was a
Hmm.
very small change. Talk about receiving. I had to have the space inside of myself to speak up for what was important for me, what I needed.
Hmm.
And the thing that no one talks about is that self-love to me is actually speaking up and showing up for yourself in that way.
Hmm.
And when you do that, especially at the beginning of a dating relationship, you really get to filter out who is good for you and who is not. And that's when, like you mentioned, when did you know? I knew pretty quickly because I knew what was important to me. I
Hmm.
knew the different parts of myself that I had met. I knew that I could feel it inside of my nervous system that certain things were getting kind of kicked up, like butterflies and everything is all good, but sometimes it's actually a nervous system reaction to maybe a younger or wounded part of us that is actually leading the dating process rather than our highest self. So
Hmm.
that's something to pay attention to. But I knew, to answer your question, I knew pretty quickly.
Hmm. Wow. I find that so remarkable too, that you, for those of us who come from homes where we didn't get the connection and the love that we needed and always had to achieve and always had to do, in that moment where you're like, can you help me? First of all, that's huge. Can you
Mhm.
help me get to bed by 9? Like, can you help me with this boundary? Just that asking for help and also the strength to not get like caught up in the like love and affection, because that's why we forego our
Mhm.
boundaries, because we want to
Mhm.
just feel love, we want to just feel the affection, we want to feel the validation. There's nothing better, especially when we haven't received that growing up. So
Mhm.
to be able to stand in for yourself, create that boundary, and just have, yeah, like your greater vision in mind, like that's so great
Mhm.
that you had
Mhm.
that oversight.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a lot of friends that are actually in the goddess woman phase, and it's it's going to be uncomfortable to speak up for yourself in that specific way. Like the movement from the chill woman archetype, which is like I don't have really any needs and wants and desires basically,
Mm.
from the fortress woman phase, which is I need to close up, I'm closing up my heart, which is good for a time. But if you stay there in this place of I'm good alone, I'm independent, I just want to, die with a bunch of animals and no partner, like that's not very fulfilling. Sorry, all you fortress women. I know you don't like hearing this. But in the fortress woman phase, you kind of figure out what your needs and wants and desires are, right? And the goddess woman phase is when you really start to align with your behaviors, what you ask for, your emotions, your beliefs. That's where you really start to align with what your needs and wants and desires are. That's the movement from the goddess woman to the magnetic woman phase. She asks for what she needs. The magnetic woman asks for what she needs. She asks for what she wants. And the thing from the goddess woman to the magnetic woman is that the magnetic woman asking is the act of self-love. Whether she gets it or she doesn't is okay. She has a secure attachment with her needs and wants and desires. Now, the goddess woman, she may be able to express her needs and wants and desires. There may be some uncomfortability, but it's like this very strict grip on does this, does this need, want, and desire have to be met?
Hmm.
It's really in the space between, the tension between expressing what our needs and wants and desires are and seeing what happens, how the other person receives that. And again, this is dating, but it's also everything.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so what do you think, Lilli, are some maybe first steps
Mm.
that women, and you don't have to speak to every phase, but how about, what you mentioned, the fortress woman and the goddess woman,
Mhm.
for each one of those phases, what is like one practical step
Mm.
that women listening can take to move them forward to start to move to that next phase?
Oh, great question. Well, here's the hard thing about when I do these talks is I'm not that type of person to give you any tips, tricks, strategies, or hacks because what we're looking for long-term change. which means that in order to change our behaviors, in order to change our, people call them limiting beliefs. They're actually self-protective beliefs. It takes time. It takes consistency, repetition, and a lot of times support over a period of time. So, what I can say is that the fortress woman archetype, the healing aspect for her, the wounded parts inside of her, um, is to look at the vulnerability inside of herself. She finds it hard to be vulnerable. Maybe her people in her life have complained to her that she's not vulnerable enough. Or maybe she feels it herself. She wants to be more vulnerable, but she can't for some reason. And that's
Mm.
because vulnerability has been unsafe for her in the past. And, different parts of herself are kind of holding that. So her work is to work on the vulnerability that she has inside of herself. Her work is also to learn to trust herself because she can't trust other people. The fortress woman can't trust other people. So there are aspects of that are happening inside of her. The alchemy is that she actually doesn't trust herself to choose the right people because she has chosen the wrong people again and again and again and again. So the healing work for the fortress woman is learning how to re-listen to her intuition. And again, this is a hard conversation for the fortress woman to have because it's very confronting because we are kind of celebrated for our kind of independence and that we can get things done. And, once again, that thing of doing instead of being. And the fortress woman is great alone, but she has not experienced a relationship, maybe even her friendships, where they actually fulfill her, enhance her, help her with her self-actualization. So it's really just safer for her just to not even try, really.
Mm.
So that's the aspect of the fortress woman I would recommend.
Amazing.
Mhm.
And yeah, the goddess.
Ooh, the goddess. So again, tip, tricks, strategies, or hacks, I go on Instagram, that's not for me. And they'll tell you to just learn how to receive or just learn how to go dance and be in your feminine energy. Great. That'll work probably in the short term, but in the long term, the healing aspects for the goddess woman is about the perfectionism inside of herself. She has a major, major, major inner critic and inner coach that happens inside of her that is really, really perfectionistic. And the interesting thing about the goddess woman is that her outward perception of her life, like whether that be her business, her Instagram, her TikTok, it's very different than what is actually happening inside of herself, especially in her dating life. She requires perfectionism from the men that she's dating. She almost takes the list of characteristics on the dates with her and see if they check off all the boxes. And you are going to get to a point, if you haven't yet, if you're a goddess woman, you will get to the point where a man will check off all of the boxes, but he still will not be able to see you, hear you, understand you, and love you the way that you need to be loved. And that is going to be very confronting. And so the work for her is the perfectionist parts inside of her, the parts that really hold on to control. The hard thing about the goddess woman is that she's been through some stuff. She has been through it. And her perfectionism and control parts have pretty much got her out of her survival where she was to where she is today. But the move from the magnet to the goddess woman, from the goddess woman to the magnetic woman, those parts, those are the ones that are up for healing. And also the judgment. Perfectionism and judgment kind of come hand in hand. The goddess woman tends to attract men that kind of aren't at her level. And whether that be, I don't know, financial level, whether that be emotional level, whether that be, um, it could be a variety of things, but there's a certain level of disconnect between what the goddess woman is. It knows kind of again that she loves herself, but her actions and behaviors don't really line up with that self-love. And it really has a lot to do with the alchemy between her perfectionist parts, her control parts, and the parts that hold judgment inside of herself. And it's reflecting on the outside of herself because she's pretty judgy. She requires perfectionism a lot in the men that she meets. And really, again,
You're
I'm
you're
see
tr-
I'm
you're
seeing
triggering
you.
me. You're triggering me, Lilli.
I know it hurts. It hurts. It hurts,
Uh,
but that is my job here. My job is to help you. Like, I'm just a mirror because
mhm,
I've been through this, and I
mhm,
know that you're a mirror to your clients as well.
mhm,
And it is very confronting because parts of us, the hard thing about the goddess woman is those parts of us are so badass because they have gotten us through so much stuff, but they don't understand yet how dropping perfectionism, control, judgment could actually be safe. And that's the work.
mhm. Yes. Wow. Yeah. And with all of this, it's a journey for sure. Even as you're
Mhm.
talking, like I can still see elements of the fortress woman in me. I can
Mhm.
definitely see elements of the goddess woman in me. I can see elements of the magnetic woman in me. I think,
Mhm.
we're like a jumble of all. I could talk to you for for another hour on all of this. How can the women listening find
Yeah.
out which archetype they are?
Yeah, I would invite any woman, that's listening, whether they are currently dating, on a break, in a situationship, even a relationship where she's not feeling seen or heard or understood and loved. There's something's happening on the inside of us that we can look at. They can take the Feminine Dating Archetype Quiz. It's at datingarchetype.com. And it's a 2-minute quiz. It'll help you reveal your blocks to love, help you find your true love match, and it'll kind of give you next steps in order to guide you onto the next phase in the journey.
Awesome. And is that the best place to connect with you as well? Or
Yeah.
for women that are curious about you and want to find out more? Is it datingarchetypes.com or dating
Yeah.
archetype?
Type. Datingarchetype.com, the best place, yeah, to connect with me as well.
Okay, awesome. I'll make sure to link that in the show notes. And yeah, anything that I haven't mentioned that you're dying to express or want our listeners to hear.
Yeah. I think, the thing I would love to close off with, thank you so much for this time. The thing that I'd like to close up with is that if you're seeing patterns in yourself or patterns outside of you, pattern is something that happens 3 or more times. Your pattern is not you, right? Your pattern is not you. It's just a part of you that is screaming for you to heal. And it is upon you to choose with the part of us. I do this too. There's the healing never ends. It's a paradigm for me. It's a life, it's just that's what I do. Keep healing. Um, the the hardest thing to do is to choose with the part of us that wants better for ourselves, right? And so your pattern, if you're seeing a pattern, it's not you. It's really just a part of you that's up, at the level that you're at right now and asking you to go deeper and to heal deeper so that you can get to your next level.
Yeah, it's just so important to know.
Hmm.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Final question
Yeah.
of the episode, Lilli. What
Yeah.
song are you dancing to right now?
Oh. Hold on one sec.
Mm-hmm.
I had an event this weekend that I hosted, and I had my ladies do some somatic release
Hmm.
to, um, Don't Give Up on Me, Andy Grammer. It's a good one.
Okay.
Actually, I might just go pop that on after we get off.
Nice. Don't give up on me.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, Lilli, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. Yeah, lots of important things that you mentioned. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And yeah, I'd love to have you back one day. Yeah, just a treat. Thank you.
I would love that. Yeah. Thank you so much, Yvonne.